of course, we are now just a little less than 2 weeks, a little more than, I guess, a week away from the midterm elections. And much of what we see happening these days have a lot to do with those elections, even if they are not directly related. With that said, perhaps the biggest and certainly most disturbing news stories of the week centered around on Tuesday. It started where an explosive device was found in a mailbox at a home owned by Soros's private company. This was in Bedford, New York. And people reacted to that as one might, not quite sure what the implications are. But by Wednesday, it became clear that this was part of a larger effort to essentially, one imagines, maim or kill a series of left-wing figures in this country. Hillary Clinton received a device in her mail. Barack Obama, CNN received one. They had to evacuate. Eric Holder, and at the congressional office, there was reports of one. And so on. And, to the extent that we know about these things, that's almost secondary to the way that the reaction to it and to how unpredictable something like this was.
Well, yeah. I mean, the list of targets of this could have been just lifted from any Donald Trump rally, right? I mean, these names it was Hillary Clinton. I think that Maxine Waters was one of them.
Maxine Waters, yes.
Andrew Cuomo was one of them. I mean, these are all people that Donald Trump obviously targets, and gives them nicknames and everything else. And so, clearly someone had a method here, and the right's, immediate reaction to this, and it was just instant. They're so steeped in conspiracy theorizing, was that this is a false flag, that it was, done by, I don't know, some nefarious group or person to try and affect the midterms, which is sort of telling, isn't it? Because, the idea that it would affect the midterms tells you that they were concerned about that, right? That these people being targeted for political violence. And, of course, it comes on the heels of two things. One is this ongoing, absurd meme that they have about left-wing mobs that are just, running rampant through the streets in the country. And then also that the Democrats had paid for this caravan in Mexico and were somehow behind it. Trump says that over and over again in his rallies. So, this idea that somehow or another the Democrats are doing all this stuff to try and win an election, I think we can pretty well see where that's going, because if the Democrats do win, it will be because they ginned up all this stuff to win an election. I mean, this sort of reaction coming from them, and I can guarantee that no matter what happens with the investigation into the bombings, the right is going to say that it was a deep state conspiracy if it turns out to be a right-wing assailant. Because that's how they now have a method of sort of covering themselves no matter what happens.
Right.
It's either a left-winger or it's a deep state FBI conspiracy to unfairly tag the right wing. So, they have this thing all coming and going. But I was astonished at how quickly and how, viciously they kind of came out. I mean, even in the worst sort of terrorist bombings or terrorist attacks that you find with, where they're all immediately rushing to the assumption that it was Muslims. This even seemed worse than that. I mean, this seemed like it was just, I guess maybe it was defensiveness that made them do it. But it was bizarre. And, of course, the president, who didn't bother, he tweets about, practically everything. He had nothing to say. All he had to say on Twitter was, I wholeheartedly agree to something that Mike Pence said, some thoughts and prayers message. And then he had an event in the White House where they sent out, it was about the opioid crisis. Melania came out, said a couple of words, and then talked about the opioid crisis. Then Trump came out and basically practically fell asleep while he was trying to say that, we need unity and this is a bipartisan thing, and then just dropped it and went on to his prepared speech. I mean, he really didn't care. And, I can only imagine what was going through his head when he saw this. I mean, he's probably glad, actually, to see the bomb threats. I'm assuming he's, actually for it.
I think he probably, though, has some awareness that this cuts against, and I think this is why there was such strong defensiveness. And I think you hit the nail on the head. This is interfering with the narrative that they were trying to build, right? I mean, let's look at this week. They have been trying to build this narrative that, like you said, there is this caravan. We're going to talk about that later in the program. A caravan of people that could not be less threatening to the United States, than, a small rainstorm that is, off the coast of I don't know, way out in the Pacific in terms of a threat to the country. But just, to your point about their attempts to elongate, because this has been going on now for a couple of weeks, this notion of the Democratic mob, right? And the protesters, and everyone is Antifa, and because they were quite successful at still making like this notion that there is this frothy left-wing mob, so much so that it knocked even the Proud Boys off of the radar. And we talked about the Proud Boys on this program last week. But when we come back, I want to just recount what we saw on Fox News, which to me captured that moment perfectly. It was really, really stunning. But I think it explains why the right responded with all these conspiracy theories that somehow this was a false flag. They clearly know it makes their rhetoric and their posturing, and it brings it to light in a way that, it crystallizes what has been going on in this country for some time. But I think their reaction was even doubly worse because of where they were trying to go with their narrative. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Sam Seder, Ring of Fire Radio, and talking to the great Heather Parton or Digby.